In a storm of fire and smoke, a 12-year-old black boy risked everything to crawl into a burning car, not to escape, but to rescue someone else, a millionaire's infant child. As flames roared and metal hissed, the boy emerged with the baby wrapped in his arms, covered in soot but alive. Cameras caught the moment, but no one expected what would happen next. The very next day, the boy stood speechless, as the millionaire did something no one could believe. He handed over everything he owned. This is a true story of fire, fate, and how courage has no age. Location, Parkside Boulevard, Illinois. Time, 4:22 p.m., Tuesday. A car explodes, a baby screams, a boy leaps into the fire, and the next morning, a billionaire knocks on his front door. Parkside Boulevard was normally peaceful. Trees lined the sidewalks, kids rode bikes freely, and the distant hum of city life felt like background music. But that afternoon, the calm shattered. A luxury SUV had rear-ended a guardrail, and its engine burst into flames. People screamed. Some ran forward. Most stepped back. Jalen, 12 years old, was walking home from the corner store. A bag of chips crinkled in one hand. A cold soda was in the other. The sharp cry of a baby stopped him in his tracks. He turned. Another cry followed. Louder, desperate. He dropped the chips and soda and ran. His feet pounded the pavement. Flames climbed the SUV's hood. Black smoke curled into the air. A growing crowd gathered, frozen. Jalen pushed past them. He reached the back door. It was jammed. He pulled hard. Nothing. He looked through the window. The baby was inside, strapped in a car seat, crying. Jalen yanked again. No movement. "Hang on, baby. I got you," he shouted. Jalen climbed in. He coughed hard, eyes watering. The seatbelt latch was hot. He fumbled. It clicked. He scooped the baby into his arms and twisted back through the door. Jalen dropped to his knees, shielding the baby. The child cried loudly, still breathing, still alive. Sirens echoed in the distance. Someone called out for help. The sound of running feet closed in. Paramedics arrived. One of them took the baby from Jalen. Another checked him for burns. The crowd looked on, silent now. What would you do if you heard a child screaming in a burning car? Share your first instinct. Jalen lived in a modest apartment with his grandmother, just 3 blocks from where the fire happened. The building was old, bricks crumbling in places, the hallway lights flickering at night, and the smell of mildew never quite faded. Their unit had 2 rooms, a bedroom and a small living area that doubled as a kitchen. A leaky faucet in the sink tapped through the silence most nights. His grandmother worked long evenings at the hospital cafeteria, chopping vegetables, washing trays, and pushing heavy carts of food. Her back was bent from decades of labor, but her voice remained steady. She always kept dinner warm for Jalen and left a handwritten note beside his plate. "You're my boy," she wrote, "and you got more heart than anyone." Jalen's life hadn't always been this way. 2 years ago, his parents were killed in a car accident on their way back from his school recital. Everything changed overnight. The house was sold. Jalen was placed in foster care. He moved through 2 homes, never unpacking fully. Then, after a court hearing filled with arguments and tears, his grandmother won custody. From that day, she became both home and hope. Despite everything, Jalen smiled often. He never complained. Around the neighborhood, people knew him as a helper. Miss Clayton on the first floor would call on him to carry her groceries. Mr. Evans, a retired carpenter, showed Jalen how to use a screwdriver to fix squeaky cabinet hinges. Jalen never asked for money. He did it because it felt right. He woke up early to walk to school, often skipping the bus to avoid the noise and fights. He carried an old backpack with torn zippers and notebooks he kept taped at the edges. But he took care of them like they were treasures. His teachers noticed his focus. His classmates noticed his silence. He wasn't the loudest or the fastest, but he never gave up on an assignment. Jalen dreamed of becoming a firefighter. It wasn't just a passing idea. It was part of him. In his tiny bedroom, he'd built a cardboard fire station when he was 7. He colored it red with markers and cut out tiny ladders from cereal boxes. On the wall, he pinned newspaper clippings about real fires, hero rescues, and interviews with first responders. Some nights, when his grandmother was at work and the city sounds crept in, he'd lie awake, picturing himself in uniform, rushing into danger to save someone. He even kept a list of things he'd need: helmet, boots, gloves, courage. He already had one of those. The others, he hoped, would come in time. The apartment had no internet, but Jalen visited the local library twice a week. He read about fire safety, emergency procedures, and rescue techniques. The librarian, Ms. Dana, set aside books she thought he'd like. She once told him, "You're already brave. You're just waiting on the world to catch up." On weekends, Jalen would help his grandmother clean the building hallway or rake the sidewalk outside. They didn't have much, but they never acted like they had less than others. Sometimes they'd share their extra bread with the stray cat that lived near the dumpsters. Jalen named it Smokey. When winter came, they layered up. Their heating barely worked, so they'd sit together under a thick blanket, sipping hot tea, watching the small television they had picked up from a thrift store. When a fire scene came on the screen, Jalen's eyes lit up. His grandmother always smiled and said, "You'll be there one day." He wasn't popular. He didn't have the newest shoes, and he never had money for snacks at school. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was doing right by people. What mattered was standing up when no one else would. What mattered was having a heart big enough to act, even when you had nothing else. And that heart, shaped by loss and lifted by love, prepared Jalen for the moment when the flames rose and a child needed saving. Have you ever had someone believe in your dreams before the world did? Tag them below. Someone who stood beside you when no one else saw your worth. The car creaked and shifted as the fire spread, metal groaning under the pressure of heat and weight. Smoke poured in thick waves, turning everything into a gray haze. Jalen coughed hard, tears welling in his eyes as he pushed his body further into the car. The heat burned his arms, but he kept moving. He had come too far. He wasn't about to stop now. The flames were creeping fast. The baby, still in the car seat, whimpered and kicked. Jalen's hands trembled as he reached forward, feeling for the latch. It was hot to the touch. His fingers slipped once, then again. He gritted his teeth, coughed again, and finally heard the click. Just as he pulled the car seat strap away, a sudden spark landed on his shirt. The cotton caught immediately. Jalen slapped at it with one hand while using the other to lift the baby. The fire climbed his sleeve. He dropped to his knees, rolled quickly, and smothered the flame against the car floor. The baby was crying louder now, alive, afraid, waiting. Jalen didn't waste a second. He wrapped the child in his arms, holding tight, shielding the little body with his own. He crouched low, the smoke thickening, and pushed backward toward the gap in the door he had forced open earlier. The metal scraped his side as he squeezed through. His legs dragged over the heated frame, and the soles of his shoes felt like they might melt. His eyes burned. His chest screamed, but he didn't let go. With a final shove, Jalen spilled out onto the pavement, clutching the baby. The moment they were clear, The rear of the SUV gave way with a sharp pop, and a fresh surge of fire erupted through the roof. Onlookers screamed. Someone rushed forward with a blanket, wrapping it around Jalen's shoulders. The baby was lifted from his arms by a paramedic, who quickly assessed the child and cradled them in safety. Another medic knelt beside Jalen, trying to examine his legs. His jeans were scorched at the calves. Blisters were already forming. Jalen winced but didn't say a word. He turned his head to watch the baby, still crying, still breathing, still alive. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then came the clapping. Cheers, shouts of, "He did it! That kid saved the baby." Someone captured the moment on their phone. A firefighter arriving on the scene ran straight toward the boy. He knelt, placed a hand on Jalen's shoulder and said, "That was braver than anything I've ever seen. You did good, son. Real good." Jalen nodded slightly, too tired to speak. His arms ached. His throat was raw, but inside him was something warm, not from the fire, but from knowing he had done the right thing. Sirens echoed louder as more emergency vehicles arrived. Smoke still drifted from the wreck, now being hosed down by a team of firefighters. Jalen sat quietly on the curb, the blanket around him, watching it all unfold. His legs burned, his hands stung. But he kept watching the baby, now swaddled in a fresh towel and being carefully rocked by a medic. Alive. Safe. He had faced the fire. He had taken the pain. He had saved a life. Have you ever had to face danger for someone else? Tell us what got you through it. The next morning, the sun peeked over the rooftops of the city, casting a soft orange glow on Jalen's street. It was early, and the usual quiet buzz of people heading to work had just begun. Jalen sat on the front steps of the apartment building, legs bandaged, arms resting on his knees. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw fire. His grandmother stood inside by the window, watching him closely. She had wanted him to rest, but Jalen insisted on getting some fresh air. The morning was cool. It smelled like dew and smoke. Then, out of nowhere, a sleek black car pulled up and parked right at the curb. It was long, low to the ground, the kind of car Jalen had only seen in magazines. The engine purred as it shut off. The door opened slowly. Out stepped a tall man in a gray suit. His hair was neatly combed, his tie perfectly pressed. But his face was broken. Preston Blake, billionaire real estate mogul, didn't look like someone who owned skyscrapers or vacation homes in 6 countries. He looked like a father. He walked quickly toward Jalen, eyes wide, arms open. Jalen stood up, unsure what to do. Preston reached him and wrapped him in a tight hug. His body shook as he sobbed into Jalen's shoulder. "You saved my daughter," he whispered. "You pulled her out of that fire. I don't even know your name." Jalen was frozen. He looked over at his grandmother, who stepped onto the porch. Her eyes were full. "I'm just Jalen," the boy finally said, his voice barely audible. Preston stepped back, eyes red, and turned around to face the growing number of reporters and photographers who had followed his car. Microphones and cameras pointed their way. Flashbulbs flickered. "The world needs to know what this boy did," Preston said, voice rising. "He didn't hesitate. He didn't think about himself. He just ran into the fire. This child saved my daughter's life." The crowd murmured. A reporter shouted, "What's your next move, Mr. Blake?" Preston ignored the question. He turned back to Jalen. "You're not just Jalen. You're a hero." Jalen's cheeks flushed. He didn't know what to say. He felt the pressure of the cameras, the eyes, the weight of attention. His grandmother walked over and placed her hand gently on his back. "We're just glad the baby is safe," she said. Preston knelt down so he could look Jalen in the eyes. "I want to help you, whatever you need. School, clothes, a future, you name it." Jalen looked at his grandmother. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir," Jalen said. Preston stood again, wiped his face, and pulled out his phone. "We'll make arrangements. But first, I want the world to hear it from me. This boy didn't just save a baby. He reminded all of us what bravery looks like." Reporters leaned in. Cameras rolled. One microphone captured Preston's words as he repeated, "His name is Jalen. Remember it." A moment later, the front door of the car opened again. A woman stepped out, holding a baby wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. It was the same baby Jalen had carried through the flames. Her eyes were open, calm, curious. Preston reached for her and held her close. He walked over to Jalen and leaned down. "Would you like to hold her?" Jalen hesitated, then nodded. The baby was placed carefully into his arms. She stared up at him, then reached for his face with a tiny hand. The cameras flashed again. But Jalen wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about how small she felt, how quiet everything seemed, and how lucky they both were. Ever met someone whose gratitude changed your life? Share that moment. The day after Preston Blake's heartfelt press moment with Jalen, the story had gone viral. News outlets ran segments on the heroic rescue. Social media flooded with praise. Hashtags with Jalen's name trended across platforms. People called him the bravest kid in America. But not everyone saw it that way. Buried among the sea of support were comments laced with suspicion. Some asked why a 12-year-old had been at the scene alone. Others questioned the timeline. A few hinted, without evidence, that maybe Jalen was too close to the fire for comfort. A particularly inflammatory post came from a local police official's anonymous account. Where was his guardian? What kind of supervision allows a child to run toward danger? Kids don't just walk into burning cars unless they're involved somehow. Screenshots of that post spread fast. Debate followed. Some people defended the officer, saying it was a valid question. Others were furious. They saw what Jalen's grandmother feared the moment she heard the sirens, that his actions would be twisted. Jalen didn't understand the backlash at first. He wasn't on social media much. But at school, the whispers started. A few kids laughed when he walked by. Someone left a fake fire starter kit in his locker. He found it, quietly closed it, and said nothing. His grandmother noticed a change. He was quieter. He sat longer at the table, picking at food. She gently asked what was wrong. "I did the right thing," he said, "but now they think I started it." She hugged him tightly. "You did more than the right thing. You saved a life. They just can't see it because they're blind to goodness when it doesn't come in the package they expect." That evening, Preston Blake heard about the rumors. His publicist tried to advise silence, to let the controversy fade. But Preston was livid. The next day, he called a press conference in front of his company headquarters. Every major news station was there. Cameras clicked. Microphones lined the podium. Preston stepped up, his voice calm but firm. "I've heard some of the things being said about Jalen," he began, "and I need to say this as loudly as I can. This young man is a hero. Full stop." He paused, scanning the crowd. Anyone who says otherwise is not questioning facts. They are revealing their own prejudice. Let's not pretend. If Jalen looked different or lived in a different zip code, no one would be asking if he belonged near the crash. No one would say maybe he had something to do with it. The crowd murmured. "I owe my daughter's life to him." and I stand with him. Always. Preston didn't take questions. He simply stepped down and walked away. The moment was shared millions of times. The tide shifted again. Journalists dug into Jalen's past, not to expose, but to honor. His story of living with his grandmother, his dream of becoming a firefighter, his quiet commitment to helping neighbors. All of it came forward. People who had doubted him before now shared apologies. Others offered scholarships, donations, letters of support. But Jalen kept his head low. He still took out the trash for Mrs. Clayton. He still helped Mr. Evans fix his garden gate. He still walked to school with his same old backpack. Only now, the world was watching differently. Have you ever had your good intentions doubted because of your background? Tell us your truth. That same evening, after the press conference had made its rounds through every news outlet, Preston Blake returned to Jalen's apartment. The streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over the neighborhood. Jalen sat inside, watching a silent TV screen, while his grandmother stirred a pot of soup on the stove. A knock came at the door. She wiped her hands and opened it slowly. Preston stood there, this time not alone. A man in a dark suit holding a slim briefcase stood beside him. Preston gave a soft smile. "Good evening," he said. "May we come in for a moment?" Jalen appeared in the hallway, surprised. His grandmother stepped aside and welcomed them in. They sat around the small kitchen table. The lawyer placed the briefcase in front of him, clicked it open, and laid out several neatly prepared documents. Preston looked at Jalen, then turned to his grandmother. "I didn't come here with a check," he said, his voice steady. "What Jalen did for my daughter can't be repaid with money. I want to thank him with something lasting. I want to thank him with a legacy." He gently slid the first document forward. "This is a deed," he said. "It's for one of my properties across town. A quiet place, good neighborhood. It's his. He can live there, grow there, or sell it when he's ready. It's his call." Jalen stared at the paper, eyes wide. His grandmother didn't speak at first. She looked down at the deed, then back up at Preston. "Are you serious?" "I've already signed everything," Preston replied. "There's nothing you need to do but accept." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached for Jalen's hand. Preston pulled out a second folder. "This one," he said, "is a college trust. I've put away enough for tuition, housing, and books, any school he chooses. I want to make sure that if he wants to become a firefighter, or a doctor, or whatever he dreams, he can do it without worrying about the cost." Jalen's grandmother covered her mouth. Jalen sat in stunned silence. For a moment, the room felt completely still. Then Jalen looked at Preston. "Why are you doing this?" Preston leaned forward. "Because you didn't hesitate. Because you risked everything. Because when others froze, you moved. And people like you deserve more than praise. They deserve every chance to thrive." The lawyer offered a pen. Jalen's grandmother signed with shaking hands. Preston didn't stay long after that. He stood, shook her hand, and then placed both hands on Jalen's shoulders. "You earned this, not because of what you did for me, but because of who you already were before any of this happened." Jalen nodded. He still couldn't find words, but inside him, something shifted. Later that night, he sat with his grandmother on their worn couch. The documents lay neatly on the table beside them. "What if I don't know what to do with all this?" he asked. She smiled. "Then we take it one step at a time, the same way we always have. But now, you've got a key in your hand, Jalen, and a key opens more than a door. It opens a future." Jalen thought about the new home, about the trust, about the weight he had carried and how, for the first time, someone had lightened it, not with charity, but with belief. Has anyone ever handed you an opportunity that felt like a dream? Tell us how it felt. Within 48 hours, Jalen's name became known across the country. News stations looped clips of the burning SUV, followed by the viral footage of Jalen emerging from the smoke, cradling the baby in his arms. Reporters used words like miraculous, heroic, and unbelievable. His image, covered in soot, holding the baby tightly to his chest, flashed on television screens, websites, and social media feeds from coast to coast. "Real-life superhero," read one headline. The city was quick to respond. Officials planned a public ceremony on the steps of City Hall. They brought in banners, photographers, and a stage. That Friday, hundreds gathered under a blue sky to witness the tribute. Local leaders, school principals, neighbors, and first responders stood in support. Jalen arrived in a borrowed suit, his grandmother beside him in her best church dress. The mayor took the podium first. Courage doesn't wait for permission. Courage moves while others freeze. And that is exactly what Jalen did. He presented Jalen with the Medal of Bravery. The audience erupted in applause. Jalen looked down at the medal, unsure how to react. Cameras clicked nonstop. Then Fire Chief Martinez stepped forward. Tall, with a voice like gravel and eyes that had seen more fires than most would dare imagine. He looked at Jalen for a long moment before speaking. "You're 12, he said. But you did what grown men sometimes fail to do. You ran into danger, you put someone else first, and you saved a life." He pulled a small patch from his coat pocket and handed it to Jalen. It had the department's emblem stitched in gold. "Anytime you want, you've got a place waiting for you at the station. We could use hearts like yours." Jalen smiled shyly and nodded. The crowd clapped again. Later that afternoon, Chief Martinez personally invited Jalen and his grandmother for a private tour of the fire station. They walked through the garage, saw the polished engines, the bunk rooms, the kitchen, and the training center. Firefighters came by to shake his hand and pat him on the back. In the gear room, the chief pointed to an empty locker. "We'll keep this one open. When you're ready." Jalen's eyes lit up. He looked around at the helmets, jackets, boots. It felt like stepping into one of the dreams he used to draw in his notebook. Reporters followed him throughout the day, but Jalen remained humble. When asked why he did it, he gave the same answer every time. "I just did what I hope someone would do for my family." His words struck chords nationwide. News anchors quoted him. A popular late-night host replayed the moment, wiping away tears. Artists made digital portraits. A local bakery even made cupcakes with Jalen's face on the frosting. Letters poured in from across the country. Schools sent him drawings. Fire departments mailed him badges and patches. One little girl wrote, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Through it all, Jalen stayed grounded. He still woke up early. He still took out the trash. He still walked to the corner store for snacks. His grandmother kept a scrapbook of the articles and awards, placing each one carefully into plastic sleeves. But Jalen never saw himself as special. In his mind, he had done what anyone would do, what someone should do. Still, his city wanted to make sure he never forgot what he meant to them. A mural was commissioned just blocks away from where the fire happened. It showed Jalen holding the baby, flames in the background, hope in the foreground. Underneath, in bold white letters, were the words, "Courage lives here." Jalen saw it for the first time while walking home from school. He stopped, looked up at the towering wall, and said nothing, just stared. Then he turned to his grandmother. "It's too big." She smiled. "Not big enough? Who do you consider a hero in your own life? Give them their flowers." Jalen stood quietly at the doorstep of the new home. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft golden light over the neighborhood. The house was modest but beautiful, with fresh paint on the porch rails and a small front yard where a patch of flowers had already begun to bloom. It didn't feel real yet. His grandmother stood beside him, clutching the keys in her trembling hand. She looked up at the door, then at Jalen. Her eyes were shining. "You ready?" she asked softly. Jalen nodded. She slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing clean hardwood floors, sunlight streaming through the windows, and the smell of newness in the air. Jalen took a slow step inside, then another. It was quiet, peaceful, safe. He walked through the hallway, ran his hand along the wall, peeked into each room. There was space to breathe, space to dream. His grandmother stepped in behind him, pressing a hand to her chest. "This is home now," she whispered. Jalen smiled. It still didn't feel real, but he was starting to believe it. Later that week, a familiar black car pulled into the driveway. Jalen watched through the front window as Preston stepped out, holding his daughter in his arms. The baby had grown a little since the fire. Her cheeks were rounder, her hair just beginning to curl. She was wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Jalen opened the door before Preston could knock. "Thought we'd stop by," Preston said. Jalen smiled and stepped aside to let them in. His grandmother brought out tea and cookies, and they all sat together in the living room. The baby cooed and reached for Jalen immediately. He took her gently, holding her the way he had that day, arms secure, heart steady. She looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, then clutched his finger tightly. Preston watched them for a long moment. "She sleeps peacefully now," he said. "That wasn't always the case after the fire. But since you held her, something changed. You gave her a future." Jalen's voice was soft. "She gave me one, too." His grandmother reached over and placed her hand on his shoulder. Preston looked around the house, taking in the framed photos, the new furniture, the growing sense of warmth that filled the space. "This place suits you," he said. "You belong here." Jalen looked down at the baby, then back at Preston. "I used to think life just happened to you, that good things were for other people, but I don't think that anymore." Preston nodded. "Sometimes it takes a moment to shift everything. 1 second, one choice." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that means something. Jalen's grandmother wiped a tear from her eye. The baby babbled, happy and calm in Jalen's arms. Before leaving, Preston placed a small box on the table. Inside was a simple silver bracelet engraved with one word: courage. "It's for you," he said, "for the day you forget what you're made of." Jalen held the bracelet, reading the word over and over. It felt heavier than it looked. As the car pulled away, Jalen and his grandmother stood on the porch, watching until the taillights disappeared. Then, slowly, they turned back toward the house. Jalen paused at the doorway, looked up at the sky, and took a deep breath. What moment changed everything for you? Share the turning point. Jalen now lives in the donated home with his grandmother. The days are quieter now, filled with routines that bring peace instead of panic. He wakes up early, makes his bed, eats breakfast by the window, and heads off to school with a focused mind. He is thriving in his classes, especially in science, where his interest in fire safety has grown into a full passion. The school staff say he is more confident, more vocal, and still as humble as ever. He tutors younger students in the library after school and never misses a chance to help a classmate. The shy boy who once kept to himself now stands taller, still quiet, but no longer unseen. On Saturdays, Jalen volunteers at the local fire station. Fire Chief Martinez welcomes him like family. He helps wash the trucks, organize gear, and watch training sessions with wide, eager eyes. The firefighters treat him like one of their own. They share stories, give him tips, and teach him the rhythms of the job. They even gave him a nickname, Little Chief. Jalen wears the department patch on his backpack and a plastic badge in his pocket. Every time he steps inside the station, he feels like he belongs. Preston and his family visit often. They never arrive empty-handed. Sometimes it is toys for the baby, other times it is books or groceries, but always it is with warmth. The bond between them and Jalen has only grown stronger. Preston often introduces him as our guardian angel. Jalen and the baby have a special connection. She giggles when she sees him, arms outstretched. When she took her first steps, Jalen was there clapping with pride. He helped her pick her first Halloween costume, a little firefighter suit, just like the one he dreamed of wearing someday. The two families now spend holidays together. Thanksgiving dinner is shared at the long table in Jalen's new home, filled with laughter, stories, and the smell of sweet potatoes and cinnamon. The living room, once so still, is now alive with joy. One afternoon, a local news crew returned for a follow-up interview. The reporter asked Jalen, if you could go back and do it again, knowing the risk, would you still run into that fire? Jalen didn't hesitate. In a heartbeat, he said, some things are worth the risk. The video clip went viral again. People across the world reposted it, quoting his words. Schools used the story in lessons about bravery. Fire departments pinned his picture on their walls. But Jalen never let it change him. He still cleaned his room. He still helped Mrs. Clayton with her groceries. He still walked the baby stroller when Preston and his wife needed a break. His grandmother once said, "Heroes don't look for attention. They just do what needs doing." Jalen lived that truth every day. He kept the silver bracelet Preston gave him in a small wooden box on his desk. On days when he felt uncertain or overwhelmed, he would open the box, read the word engraved on it, and take a deep breath. Courage. It was not just what saved the baby. It was what built a new life. For all of them. The mural downtown remained a popular stop. People came to see the boy who ran through fire. But those who met Jalen in person always said the same thing. He was even more impressive in real life. Kind, thoughtful, brave in the quietest ways. Jalen never chased the spotlight, but it found him anyway. If you believe bravery should be celebrated, share this story. The world needs more Jalens.